The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. It is one of the most coveted trophies in the world, but are gold medals really gold? Well, mostly, they're not. The gold medals given out these days are nearly entirely silver and are plated with pure gold to give them that iconic sheen. Silver medals are, of course, made with silver, and bronze medals are a combination of copper and other metals like tin or zinc. And while winning an Olympic medal is priceless, the value of the materials in the medal are not. In recent games, some of the materials used to make the medals have come from recycled cell phones. Mass Mutual celebrates women's sports history and understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
The Athletic.
Okay, so MotoGP's 2024 Italian Grand Prix was not the most exciting MotoGP race you'll ever see, but it might have been a very significant one in the 2024 title fight. Was this the weekend when Pecco Bagnaia got things together, got his house in order and started hunting down Jorge Martin for the championship properly? Was this the weekend when Jorge Martin started to crack? We've got a little while to find out because MotoGP has an additional summer break coming up with the Kazakh GP moved, but we've got quite a lot to talk about before then and to fill that time as well. I'm Matt Beard, this is the Race MotoGP Podcast. Simon Patterson joins me from the Mugello press room and Val Khorounzhiy as well. This was a bit of a weird one in that when you look at the outcome, a massive point swing towards Pecco Bagnaia, second place decided at the very last corner of the very last lap involving a title contender, major moves in the last couple of laps. It's like, yeah, that's significant. That's a race. And yet for the majority of the distance, absolutely nothing whatsoever happened. So, Simon, are you going to disagree with that, or are you going to back me up on the fact this was not a classic?
I mean, weirdly, as the first person to complain about boring races, I really enjoyed today's. And I think it's because it felt like there was constant pressure. It felt like there was kind of a sense of constant peril to everyone that was there, because Bagnaia was leading comfortably, but we've seen him make plenty of mistakes while he was leading comfortably in the past. Martin has been on the limit all weekend and has been pushing really hard at the limit to try and stay in contention with Bagnaia in any sense of it. And Bastianini his way through the last few laps of the race in style. And then there's just Marc Marquez and Pedro Acosta being absolutely dumb in fourth and fifth where anything could happen. So I actually quite enjoyed it. Which is super odd because I'm normally the one on the other side of this debate.
Yeah.
But yeah, there you are.
But your argument there is based on the fact that a large percentage of our frontrunners are liable to do something crazy even when sitting on comfortable leads, which I agree with, but I don't think it's the recipe for necessarily great racing. And I'm going to be the sort of... go on.
I think employ idiots is a great strategy for making highly entertaining broadcast television.
We've also been spoiled a little bit. I think pre-season, there might have been a lot of predictions that with ride height devices, tyre pressure worries, sheer Ducati domination, strength of Bagnaia, that an awful lot of the season would look like this, and it actually hasn't, has it?
I think that's another part of it. We have had, like, the last, 3-4 races since Austin have been proper barnstormers. They've been really, really good, but they've been... I don't want to say like over dramatic, but there's been a lot going on, and it also kind of felt nice to have one of those races where someone like Bagnaia gets to do a Bagnaia thing. It's like how it was always quite nice when there was a race mid-season where Jorge Lorenzo actually won it start to finish like a metronome, because it is quite cool to see someone at the top of their game sometimes, even if that is a bit boring. And there was definitely a sense of that today, because like Bagnaia was just flawless.
No, I'm with Simon in a way. I did find it, I think, actively boring, but I can't fault the formula for it. It's, it was always going to happen the second Bagnaia took the lead into turn 2. And I think everybody watching knew, this is probably going to be one of those days, because his pace through the weekend suggested that if you give him clean air, then the chances are very, very high that that's that for the race. In fact, I don't know how much of it was Bagnaia managing and how much of it was genuine peril, but Jorge Martin ran him closer than I expected for the 20 laps. That doesn't mean it was particularly enthralling to watch, but it was more intrigue than I expected. The only problem there is I think it suckered TV direction into not showing anything else, which I did, because there were position changes going on lower down the field, and it feels to me like we just don't care, and that's a bit of a bummer. There were changes for position. Brad Binder and Aleix Espargaro were fighting for 10th. There was Fabio Di Gianantonio fighting his way through the pack. He ended up a 10th behind Franco Morbidelli, even though he was like 5 places behind after the opening lap. So clearly he was doing something. And we didn't really see any of that because we were watching the front with the promise that something is going to happen. And ultimately something did happen. But again, just there was time to fill in that race. It didn't necessarily get filled. But I can't complain too much. It's the kind of race you get when the fastest guy hits the front right away. So if anything, my complaint is with the other riders around Bagnaia that knew going into the race, we should not let this happen, and immediately let it happen right away.
It's very much like the Qatar opener, wasn't it, in terms of Bagnaia just knowing that if he got the job done in the first few corners, that would be it for everybody else. And as much as we talk about Bagnaia being captain stealth and that sort of thing, actually he's very good at just going, I need to overtake 4 people in front of me immediately, not necessarily off the line, but through the opening corners. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to just manage that from here. And that is kind of his USP in a way, and he did it very, very well today.
Bagnaia's first 2 corners were a work of art.
Yeah.
It was like he just floated through the pack. It was beautiful to watch. I've watched it back over and over again because it is just so nice. The way that, 5th with that grid penalty, 5th the first in 2 corners, picking a line through that just worked, setting it up in turn 1 to be on the exit of turn 2 in the right place. Yeah, really, really just... someone described it to me on Twitter afterwards as, Jorge Lorenzo was always the hammer and butter. Well, this guy is the knife in the butter. You know what I mean? He's so much less of a blunt object than Lorenzo could have been. But he's sharp. He's just so good at finding a way through it. Top work. Really enjoyed it.
I think he got a little bit lucky, and I think he admitted that too. With Maverick Viñales washing out wide through turn 1, if the timing is just a little bit off, then I think Bagnaia goes with him and then ends that corner in 5th place or something. And it's a much harder race from there. But, he didn't. So that's, we're not going to deal in hypothetical, even though I just did. So,
Simon, what was it like atmosphere-wise this year? Because since Valentino Rossi stopped at Mugello, it feels like every year we've done a story about crowds not being there, atmosphere not being there. Bagnaia is now establishing himself very much as Italy's MotoGP hero for this generation. He's got a national colours livery bike for race day as well. What was the vibe like? Bit more energy to it this year, or still struggling?
We come into the circuit this morning about 8:15, which is about the same time as we come in yesterday morning. And this morning we kind of lost like 30 minutes stuck in traffic, coming like 5 kilometers. It was busy, and then there's a bit where as you come in, where you get to a point and there's about 1 kilometer to go, and it's paddock traffic only, but you're allowed to walk down that route. And we had to pick our way through, thousands of people pouring into the circuit on foot. And we actually talked about it at the time. It was really, really notable that there's now less yellow than ever before, and more, particularly, specifically, more Bagnaia red. The 46s are slowly being replaced by 63s. It's taken a long time to get to that point, but it is happening. And then whenever the race started, we had a massive crowd, the biggest crowd I've seen here since probably 2019, whenever people thought it might be Valentino's last race, so they all came to make sure that they could say they were here for it. Big crowds, amazing atmosphere. The media centre, weirdly, for the race was super loud. I actually wish we'd stuck a microphone on so we could have stuck a bit of it into the podcast, because you have a big Spanish contingent and a big Italian contingent sort of screaming abuse at each other good-naturedly as various riders take the lead. It all in all, it felt like Mugello of old, which has been so missing. It's went from being the race I'd never recommend anyone to go to, because it got a bit dull, to being right back up there with one that you need to experience.
That's lovely.
I'm really glad we got through that blip.
Yeah, also though, like you said, it had taken a while, but fair enough in a way. Like Valentino Rossi's impact on the whole appeal of MotoGP was so absolutely enormous, and so I don't begrudge someone like Bagnaia taking a bit of time to supplant that in a way.
The problem has been that no one in Italy, it feels like, did any legacy planning. No one planned a transition from Valentino to anyone else. And it's not that the things have changed, it's that Pecco went and won 2 titles and said, hey, I'm the new fast Italian.
Yeah.
And it took those wins, it took those 2 titles to do it. It took him, absolutely cementing his status as the king of Mugello. I think with 3 wins in a row now, he is the guy here. He has worked more hard than anyone else in Italy to make this what it is again today. He deserves a bit of credit for that as well, I think. But yeah, all in all, I'm glad it's back to being a spectacularly stupid place.
The other thing there, though, is you say no one did any succession planning, legacy planning. In a way, Valentino Rossi himself did by bringing all these kids through, having his own team and that kind of thing. But just thinking about it off the top of my head now, in a way that sort of split the affection a little bit. You had a few years where it was who is the new Rossi? Do we cheer for Bagnaia? Is Frankie Morbidelli going to come through? Is Marco Bezzecchi actually going to be the hero here? Do we all cheer for Rossi's team? It's been a bit of a fractured picture, and now it's very clear that, the person you're looking at, if you want an Italian hope, is Bagnaia. There's some really good other people as well. It's good to see Morbidelli looking more competitive this weekend. Bez is still in a rut and seems to be in an even bigger one again this weekend, but we don't doubt his overall ability. But if you're looking for an Italian rider to lead this generation, there's absolutely no doubt who that is now. And he's done it with speed and success and racecraft, as Rossi did, but because he's been such a quieter presence off track, his selling point is, I'm going to say something thoughtful and interesting about this, and if I'm controversial, it's kind of by accident rather than seeking the headlines all the time. So it's happened. I can totally understand why it's taken this long, and it's been a bit of a kind of baby steps process, but I'm also really glad that it has, and that you've had the experience this weekend, and tens of thousands of Italians have had that experience this weekend. That's been a bit more like Mugello's heyday again. That pleases me on a Sunday afternoon recording this, and good luck getting out the circuit when it comes to that.
Oh, the great thing about doing the podcast from the media centre is that by the time we come to get out of here, it'll have quietened down a little bit. My favourite, I'm going to throw this in really quickly as an anecdote because I told someone it earlier and it reminded me, my favourite Mugello story is a few years ago that the father of a Moto3 rider decided he'd leave early to beat the traffic and left halfway through the MotoGP race. And as he left, Valentino Rossi's engine blew up, and he DNF'd out of the race, and it still took 2.5 hours to get out of the car park because all the Italians went home halfway through the race as well.
We used to have a habit of not talking about the race winner until 47 minutes into this podcast, and I was so tempted because the race was quite dull to do that today, but it was too significant for the title battle, so we had to do Bagnaia first. But I consider Bagnaia done for this podcast now. We've declared you the new Valentino Rossi officially. I think that's good. Let's move on to the guy who Pecco took lumps out of in the title fight this weekend, Jorge Martin. The gap is down to 18 points, which feels like a more vulnerable one to be thinking about over these 4 weeks with no racing now. What do we make of Jorge Martin's weekend? He still got a podium on the weekend. He wasn't necessarily on the absolute pace, but he did also... That became a third, not a second, on the very last corner, the very last lap, and he did throw it off the road in the sprint. So... Val, what's your Martin assessment this weekend?
Yeah, a sprint thing's really bad. That's really the points that he should not have been giving away this weekend. It was always going to be a points loss here, and it was always going to be probably... there's a really good chance of it being double digits one way or the other, because I don't think he had the pace of Bagnaia, and honestly I was really surprised how long on Sunday he stayed ahead of both Enea Bastianini and Marc Marquez. Because if you would have asked me pre-race, I would have said he's the fourth Ducati. And for most of that race, he was the second, and even sort of threatening a Bagnaia attack, which was really impressive. I thought he did a really good job in that regard. But he lost points he shouldn't have lost. Obviously, the sprint crash, which was a crash that in increasingly familiar fashion for both Martin and Bagnaia, is a crash he says he doesn't really understand. But I think one that at this point they just accept that the lap times are so quick that when you crash, it just happens too fast to really make sense. And they look at the data and don't really see what makes it happen, because I guess if you're on the limit all the time, then once you do cross it, well, you haven't really done anything that different, but you were on the limit already. The whole point of being on the limit is that it can go. And, in that case, it went. It's still very bad for his championship. I think he was finishing that race third or fourth. Maybe Pedro Acosta had something for him. Maybe there was a bit of Pedro Acosta pressure from behind that contributed to it. It's hard to say. I'm not too beaten up against, about the mistake in the race in the closing stages, which he himself admitted that he looked at the lap board, he saw 0.8 to Enea Bastianini, and he was like, well, it's fine. At least I have second. It's all good. And then the final corner, he goes a little bit wide and he hears Bastianini's bike and he's horrified. I mean, it's Enea Bastianini, so you really should expect it. That's his calling card. That's what he does. So it's pretty bad, but it's a 4-point swing. That's less dramatic. He was always losing points here. Just he did not need that sprint points loss. It should be more comfortable than it is right now. Pace-wise, I was quite impressed.
I mean, yeah, there's not an awful lot to add to that. It was a good weekend of damage limitation, which is something that Jorge Martin has not always been good at. It's normally either massive damage or massive points that he does well, with very little in between. So I think actually to see him kind of, make the best out of a weekend where he was on the limit, like the sprint race, he was on the limit. Like that crash came because he was absolutely, that bike would go no faster for him. So yeah, I think definitely it's another one of those races where it might not have been like overly spectacular from him, but it reinforces my notion that he is developing into something a bit more mature and a bit more confident, a bit more willing to not do things even more than to do them, to kind of settle now and then. It bodes well for the rest of the season. It bodes well for his future, but I am still of the opinion that I think Bagnaia has the momentum now, and that's going to be difficult to slow.
I remember coming into the weekend, it was, they were doing the pre-race press conference, and I remember hearing Martin say that, Bagnaia is still championship favorite, and I rolled my eyes so high they basically escaped into my brain.
Yes.
Because, 40 points lead if you're not a championship favorite, then what are we even doing here? I realize now that I suspect Bagnaia's almost guaranteed 37 points at Mugello were weighing pretty heavily on Martin's mind, and I would like to really wonder whether that contributed to what happened on Saturday. Just the attempt to limit as much damage as he could, because there was always going to be damage, and if he didn't fully accept that, he should have. Maybe he did, and it was just an error. In any case, there will be not that many more tracks exactly like this to go in this season. I think Misano is going to be one. I would expect 37 from Bagnaia at Misano. Is Aragon on the calendar? I should check the calendar sometimes.
It is.
That might be an interesting one.
When are they fitting that in? Crikey, I thought something had been squeezed off this year, but no, you're absolutely right. Aragon is still on the calendar. Yeah. Yeah.
So there'll be a few tracks where you can't stop the Bagnaia train. And this weekend he did okay, but he could have done better. He being Martin.
Yeah, it says a lot still that even after a weekend when he crashed out of a podium in the sprint, I think you're right to go. This was still, Simon, it's still a good learning weekend for Martin, still a good proving he's a title contender weekend, because he did get a really sensible result, even with losing second at the last corner. I still think this is a better version of Martin than we'd have seen in that circumstance a year ago, certainly more so than 2 years ago. The other title protagonist had a big points blow this weekend as well, but didn't have any disasters. Marc Marquez is now 35 points behind Jorge Martin. So, tricky one with Marquez. He just didn't quite have the pace this weekend, despite looking in qualifying until a crash like he really, really did. I don't quite know what to make of where Marquez stands the rest of the season after this one. Simon, what are your thoughts?
I mean, he's still going to win in Sachsenring.
True.
That's inevitable at this point. There's lots of positives to take from this weekend, I think, for Marc Marquez. He's still close in contention with the GP24s that are better than his bike at this point. One thing that he was really, really proud about actually after the race, really, really happy about, was lots of people have been complaining this weekend about how tired they are, about how physical this track has become with all the aero. Multiple people had arm pump. Raul Fernandez is dashing off for surgery because of it. And Marc's upper right arm didn't hurt. And he was so relieved about that post-race. You could see this sort of, the joy in his face as he was telling us that basically everything works again, which isn't the situation it was in at the start of the season. That is something that has developed through this year. It's an improvement. And I think that means that, plus maybe the prospect of some upgrades coming his way, means that we're still not seeing the best Marc Marquez. There's still work to be done to make this the full package. But the fact that he's, within touching distance of these guys in the state that he's in now, in the state that he has been in over the opening races, means a mountain of potential still to properly tap into there.
You could see in the race, you could see that just a little bit not enough. You could see that he just couldn't make his way past Enea Bastianini during Bastianini's sort of leaner laps. And you could see how difficult the overtake was at turn 1, so that when he was overtaken back, he was like, well, that's that. I'm not doing that again. So we might as well finish fourth. I'd like to bring something up. Is my eyes are telling me one thing and my ears are telling me different. What my ears are telling me is that not only did all the GP24 riders on the podium say, no, look, the bike difference isn't that big. So did Marquez himself. Marc said, yeah, it's not that huge of a chasm. My eyes tell me I'm not sure he believes that. Like, maybe the GP24 guys do. I don't know that Marc does. And here's one reason why I don't believe it. Let's tally up the average race position, so at every lap, for all of the GP23 riders this season. And this is all the races or the sprints. Marc Marquez, 4.3. Fabio Di Giannantonio, 9.0. Good job, Digia. Good weekend. Alex Marquez, 10.5. Marco Bezzecchi, 10.9. Di Giannantonio, Alex Marquez, Marco Bezzecchi were all giving the Works Spec Ducatis a lot of trouble last year. They did it in turn. They did it some weekends and not at others. But there were weekends where they were up there and mingling with Pecco Bagnaia and with Jorge Martin. That is not happening at any point this season, basically. Maybe Bezzecchi's done it like once or twice. Maybe there have been flashes, but not really. The only person who's doing it is Marc Marquez. He is bludgeoning them, absolutely demolishing them. I don't think the three of them just got much worse in the off-season. All of them just went binge drinking or whatever and were never the same. Obviously, that's not the case. The common denominator here is the bike. The bike is not as competitive as the GP22 was versus the GP23. For me, I don't understand how that cannot be true.
And other maths on that front as well. Marquez was fastest GP23 in qualifying by, I think, 4.5 tenths, 7 seconds clear of the second best GP23 in the sprint, 8 seconds clear of the second best GP23 in the main race. Simon?
I mean, you don't even have to go into the maths to see it. You just have to watch the race. The bike's slower out of the corners. It's not as fast in the terms of top speed. He was struggling to get past Bastianini in the slipstream, which other Ducatis who are right behind each other can generally do. That's kind of reflected a bit in the speed trap times as well whenever you look at them. It's just not as quick, and it sounds like from some of the conversation I've been having that it's not as good either. There's bits of it that don't work as well. We saw Marc's bike pushing out clouds of white smoke all race long, or blue smoke, which it turns out was a ride height device, kind of causing a bit of the fairing of the bike to rub on the tyre that Marquez said left the tyre blistered after the race. From what we understand, the GP24 ride height device is much better, and it's notable that you could see it a lot with Marquez, a little bit with Digia, and not a thing at all with the GP24s. There are visible differences that make this bike better right now. the kind of the textbook example is the last 2 laps of Le Mans. Actually, if you go back and watch one GP23 fighting with 2 GP24s, you can just see how much better it is out of the corners, how much more easy it is for them to break into corners. We're looking at a Marc Marquez that is as good as we've maybe seen a Marc Marquez over the years, or very close to it, on a bike that's not as good as the most dominant bike that MotoGP maybe ever has in the format in the GP24, or at least maybe not ever, but like we're talking like Honda V5 days since something was as good as, or as better over everything else as this one is.
Another way to do this is, another visual way to understand this is a mental exercise that I've just done on myself. I call it, imagine a VR46 leading a MotoGP race. What color is it? For me, it's black. It's a black VR46 leading the race. It's not a yellow VR46 leading the race. You don't see them there.
No, we'll put it this way. When you said imagine a VR46 leading a MotoGP race, I was like, I can't imagine that, because that doesn't happen now.
I went to Bezzecchi in Argentina last year.
Well, there you go.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah.
Like that, it did, and that wasn't rehearsed.
They're not really showing up in the broadcast right now.
No.
And
well, they're not in the top 4, so yeah, very true. So I referred to this as like a big points blow for Marquez, and then 2 seconds later I was like, hang on, Matt, he actually gained on the actual points lead this weekend. His gap is smaller. It's because of Martin's disaster. It's 35, not 41. But in terms of like perception of can he actually hang in there, just watching him, his gaps to Bagnaia, his performance versus Bastianini, I definitely come away from this weekend feeling a lot less convinced of Marquez's title hopes.
This is not the upside down 2020 season with 14 races. This is new modern MotoGP with I don't know how many rounds do we have now. It was 22. Is it 20 now? Yeah, it feels that way. They've all merged into one.
Yeah, it is 20. I thought it'd be more. Okay, it's 20.
So we've got 40 races this year. There is no way on earth you win a title this year without winning races.
Yes.
It's just not possible with 40 of them to win from. So he has to start winning races. He has to find that step that's missing so far. Because you can't always say, oh, well, whenever it comes to explaining why he's second or third or fourth.
You know we love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right. You could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on, or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn, and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, how to get 30, how to get 20, 20, 20, how to get 20, 20, how to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
So if Marquez is not on a competitive enough bike to win the championship in 2024, what about 2025? We didn't get a Ducati 2025 Works rider announcement this weekend. I'm not even sure we got any progress towards working out who that will be necessarily, because we were fairly convinced by the end of last week that Jorge Martin was heading towards that bike. But what is going on?
We might actually be further away from it after the last lap of that race.
Oh, yeah, that's a point. I don't think Bastianini going. He was almost like self-parody Bastianini for those last 4 laps, though, and suddenly going, oh yeah, remember 2022 when I did this? I'll just do this again for a bit. It was too much. Don't keep that in your pocket. Just do that a little bit earlier in the weekend.
Italian, highly rated Italian newspaper, Gazzetta dello Sport, is reporting that Ducati have signed Martin for the factory team, and you can always tell a little bit about the veracity of a rumor whenever, if someone reports it and then the media center just kind of says, yeah, okay, and accepts it.
Yeah.
And no one has anything to say to counter it, that's kind of a steer that it's right. And this one was one of those. No one has come back and said, anything else, anything to the contrary. In fact, I spoke quite a bit over the weekend to Carlo Pernatne, Bastianini's manager, and he's talking about Aprilia options and KTM options. Marc Marquez kind of accidentally started a war of words with Pramac by saying that he definitely wouldn't go to Pramac. And it's not a slight on Pramac, and I think they took it the wrong way to an extent. I mean, this is a guy who's changed teams once in 12 years in MotoGP. He doesn't want to do it twice in 2 years. I understand why he wants to stay with Gresini next year. But there's this game of chicken is still going on where one of them is waiting on the other side to blink because he thinks if he refuses to go to Pramac will go to Yamaha because they won't have a superstar rider like Marc Marquez to replace Jorge Martin. And then there'll be 2 spare factory Ducatis that'll go to his team. All of this is going on, and whenever you actually pay attention to what everyone has said, no one has given anything close to a concrete answer on what anyone is going to do. People keep saying things like, at this time, Pramac are staying with Ducati, or we don't see right now that we would be able to build 5 GP25s for next season. No one is pinning anything that can be treated as concrete to it. And it's going to roll on for another few weeks. You would hope that we go into Assen with some sort of a resolution to this because Ducati have to make a decision at some point. Someone has to blink. But I think it remains the Pramac Marquez conundrum rather than the Martin to the factory spot at this point.
And the way Jorge Martin has spoken all weekend, I mean, I think he certainly believes that it's getting over the line, that it will happen, that it's just awaits a signature and some what do they say, crossed I's and dotted T's. Is that what they say?
Along those lines. I think that's how you'll do it, Val, certainly. Okay. Marquez saying Pramac's not an option for me, for a second reminded me of Johan Zarco saying I'm definitely not going to Avintia at the end of 2019. Yes. But it's a very different case to that, which I still find that one of the most hilarious MotoGP stories of Zarco having to backtrack when he realised what Ducati was actually offering him at Avintia.
Because then Ducati took him into a motorhome and hashed out what a move to Avintia would actually mean, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
And then he was like, oh, no, that's fine. I'm into this. This is okay.
Whoops. Maybe should have held my tongue.
I mean,
a tiny bit.
Mark wants the same outcome for himself, basically. He wants Ducati to take him into a motorhome and wants to say, well, not Pramac. I don't think he wants Pramac, but he wants Ducati to value him over Pramac, I guess, in a way, or to value him enough to build a 5th GP25 for next year.
I don't think he does. I genuinely don't think that he's playing any sort of games. I think he just wants a bike that's fast in a team that he's happy in. I think maybe there's a risk of reading a lot into it about what he's trying to politic out of it, but he just wants a GP25 to stay with Frankie Carcetti and the Gresini guys because he's happy, and Fast Mark is happy Mark. So I get your point, Val, but I don't necessarily think he's trying to find, it isn't that he needs reassurance from Ducati or anything like some other riders certainly do. Like Martin essentially has demanded in order to stay where he is. Mark just wants go fast now. Bike go fast soon.
But giving up on Gresini, and Gresini is nice and it's taken a punt on him and clearly there's a mutual affinity there. But giving up on Gresini to go to a championship winning bike at a team that has proven itself capable of winning championships, no question, is a much lesser sacrifice than giving up the multi-million pay packet at Honda to go to Gresini in the first place. If the ultimate goal really is the title, if nothing matters but the championship, then you take that Pramac offer immediately, right away. You sign right now. But clearly, there are other things at play that he wants to make work for himself. I'm not saying it's like a personal affront type of thing, but it is definitely a power play. I'm certain it's a power play.
There is one element I'm going to throw out here, and it's one of those ones that is the reason why I've got a reputation sometimes in the paddock.
God, this bodes well.
I don't think Pramac's as good a team as Gresini is, because it is an incredibly disorganized squad at some points. It feels sometimes like they're a team that are held together by their Ducati engineers and that there's a lot of chaos going in. I genuinely think Gresini run a tighter ship, and I think he's probably a little bit aware of that.
Okay, no, that's valid. I'm into that as an explanation. I mean, for Pramac's results,
I certainly don't think there's a huge difference at all, at least, to be a bit more polite about it or whatever. There is not a difference between Gresini and Pramac in terms of team.
I believe
except that he knows one of them really well.
Well, yeah, but
and one of them has a better bike.
One of them, in theory, has the right to the 2025 bikes, and the other one, you have to make things happen to get it.
Kiss's MotoGP contracts mean not. Mark. In theory, Honda have the right to Marc Marquez riding for them this year. So
I should say I posited this during the weekend, and it was sort of a half joke, but I also really like it as an idea. Is this also a way to make 2 fewer really good Pramac Ducatis on the grid and 2 more really not good Pramac Yamahas on the grid? Because I would want that if I was a rider for some other team. That'd be pretty cool. I'd be into that.
Can you give your exact analogy that you did in our work chat the other day, Val? From Marcus's point of view, it was something like, who is more likely to knock me out of Q2?
Exactly. Thank you because I didn't remember what analogy I made because I say so much nonsense. But yeah, it's who will leave me in Q1? It's a Pramac Ducati. It's not a Pramac Yamaha. That I think I used the words that Fabio Di Giannantonio and Sergio Garcia are hitting with hammers to make work. Yeah. Is the words I used.
To take this Val's conspiracy theory to the fullest extent, then Marc Marquez has been sent by Repsol Honda to destroy Ducati from within by removing one satellite team at a time.
6D chess.
With everything we know about Marc Marquez, it seems logical that he is thinking a little bit big picture, a little bit long term, and a little bit political here. But I can also see the logic that he's just going, I like this team, I want the best bike I can get, I'll see if I can keep both. And actually not even the ramifications, I don't think he's unaware of all the ramifications in terms of what it means for Pramac, what it means for how Ducati views him. But I can totally believe he's just going, actually, I should be able to ask for this stuff. That's what I want. Give it to me. Because I know you say he made a big sacrifice to get away from Honda to get back into title contention, and surely he should make the smaller sacrifice now. But that was when Marc Marquez still had to prove himself to himself again to prove he could even function as a top MotoGP rider. He knows he can now. He knows he's a front runner again. He's pretty much proved that he's not, if not back to his best, at least back to a pretty high percentage of it.
Like, you're probably right.
He's got a few more cards to play now, but I do like all the conspiracies.
Exactly. Fun. You're probably right, but what's the fun in that?
Well, indeed. Another factor in the Marquez mix is this sort of dangling possibility of KTM making a play for him. And we've got to get onto this because Pedro Acosta is officially going to be a 2025 factory KTM rider. Simon, in your story about this, you described it as the worst kept secret in the paddock. I don't feel like it's even been kept a secret. I think it's more like such an obvious logic that no one even needs to say it out loud, because as soon as Acosta turned up, even if Jack Miller and Brad Binder were going well, you're just going, well, he's obviously going to be on a factory bike next year. And they almost didn't need to announce it. But
you know that Thanos I am inevitable meme from the Marvel movies? It's essentially that.
I do know that. Matt does not watch those movies.
No, I was going to say, I'm not even going to pretend. It
is essentially that. He has just come in and been like, I am inevitable here. and it's that's the way it's been, because that's that's Pedro Acosta. That is this guy right now. He's just, I mean, and then as if there was anything, as if he needed to do anything to underline his signature and his new contract. He did it this weekend by just making the factory, all the KTMs, look absolutely like a joke. Like, they had a disaster and he didn't again, because he's just. I'm seriously having to reevaluate my belief that that the KTM have had a good bike but not a great bike, because more and more he's making it look like KTM have a great bike and average riders. That is super mean on Brad Binder in particular, but I mean, come on.
Another way Pedro Acosta is like Thanos is he's going to make 50% of the KTM lineup disappear.
Yeah.
I mean,
I do know what that means. I have at least read the plot summary of that movie.
This was shocking. It was so much worse than the season before, because always you could before you could point to execution, and you could be like, well, this is the moment where the weekend went towards Acosta and away from, let's say, Brad Binder or whatever. Well, this is this is a familiar failing, but at least, they can run similar lap times. This weekend he spent his weekend in one part of the timesheets, and all of the other ones have spent it in the other part of the timesheets. And there was minimal overlap. Brad Binder did have a P2 lap erased for a minor track limits breach on Friday that would have put him into Q2, which he then wasn't able to get through Q1. And that lap was quicker than Acosta's lap in that session. I think it was also a toe lap. It made his weekend look worse than it was, but the race pace was not there. It was not there on Saturday. It was not there on Sunday. He knew it. He showed it right away. He finished 10th place on Sunday on merit. This is what happens when the KTM does not gain 50 positions off the line. This is the pace it had in Binder's hands. That's pretty damning, isn't it? It's not good. And to say nothing of the other two who need something and they need it now, because I began the weekend thinking that Jack Miller should have a good chance at Tech 3. After this weekend, I don't know that I can say that.
I believe that Jack Miller should have a good chance at Tech 3 from Assen, as I've repeatedly said. It becomes more and more obvious that there's absolutely no point in keeping him in the factory colours, because guess what? It turns out when he's not crashing now, he's slow. It's a disaster. It has gone so wrong for KTM in all regards, apart from the fact that they've signed this kid that's doing phenomenal things. And you know what? Actually, there's got to be an element of Acosta that's thinking that he's quite glad, or they're thinking they're quite glad that they've got him signed up so early.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because maybe it is the bike that's awful all of a sudden, and maybe he is that good. And you know, he's managed by a guy who manages a rider, a factory Ducati rider and a factory Aprilia rider in Jorge Martin and Aleix Espargaro. They know what other bikes are like. They talk about them. Yeah. And my God, if we put him in a GP24 this season, he would be doing what Marquez did in his rookie season.
That's entirely
that's what this looks like. That's how good he looks at the minute. And you've just got these other two guys here just lost the plot. And I should say, poor Augusto Fernandez has just had a disastrous weekend with things breaking and going
that's
wrong.
Also true.
I feel quite sorry for him that he's probably going to lose his seat partly through things that are not necessarily his fault at this point.
But only partly.
Yeah, only partly.
Yeah.
Because he's not been performing to the same level as, But, you know, and then the other worrying thing about this weekend is that a tired and admittedly unrace fit Paul Espargaro came in and only finished one position behind Jack Miller.
Yeah.
So what the hell is going on in the factory team?
It's strange. It's really strange because it suggests that actually if you were to transpose it compared to 2023, you would suggest the RC16 has actually got a lot worse and Acosta's just bailing them out. And it's not an explanation totally outside of the realm of possibility. But I mean, they're suffering some vibration that seems to be worse than what the Ducatis had, even potentially. And I guess Acosta's just riding his way around it. But you know, we've seen the lap times from this weekend. He was the only guy running anywhere near the Ducatis, and all of the other KTMs were somewhere else doing something else. This is the point where do they try to find a different teammate in KTM Orange? I'm probably not, right? You wouldn't bother. That's too much disruption. You already have Pedro, so it doesn't matter. But if Mark's on the market, do you have vacancies? Do you try to make something happen?
That's the only reality, isn't it? It's Marquez or Martin.
Yeah.
I don't even think it's Enea Bastianini.
No, I don't either. Yeah. Enea could go to Tech 3.
Although it is worth noting that I think Enea Bastianini might actually, if chaos ensues here, there is an opportunity for Bastianini to find his way into Tech 3 on a factory spec bike. His old crew chief is now KTM's factory liaison to the Tech 3 squad. There's a connection there. There's some bridges there, but yeah, I don't think you'd upset the Binder dynamic.
Yeah, unless it was for Mark.
Unless it was for someone who you know is going to be better right away. And lucky for Binder, there's not that many people available right now. But if we had a rider market window where people weren't on the market officially until the summer break, and there was certain names still available, then Brad Binder might be wearing red next year.
Interesting. So here's what I'd do. First of all, if I was in charge of KTM, I'd make sure I did it politely. I wouldn't announce any of it during a practice session. That's the first thing I'd just get sorted in my plan. When you've got Fernandez and Miller struggling this much, you want to bolster your lineup for the future generally. You have 4 riders right now. 2 of them aren't what you need. You've got question marks over a third one, but he has done so much for you that he has a bit of grace. There's a bit of credit in the Binder bank. He's been doing enough the last couple of years to make you go. And
he's not like appalling slow. He's
well,
not
he's
slow.
Had some really,
apart from
really
this
ropey
weekend
weekends of just complete ropiness, and it's not been great to see. But you want your lineup to be strong, so I would say you just make sure you pack Tech 3 as strong as you can. Whether that is a total dice roll on if you can entice Marc Marquez, you make sure you get the best cast-offs from somewhere else you can. If that is Bastianini, or you take your proper pick of who's coming up from Moto2. You really want some very good backstop options in Tech 3, and I think for me this is when you get prepared for a mid-season switch if something's not working, and that's next season. If the first half of Binder's 2025 on a new bike is like this, and there's a big gap to Acosta, that's when you go, okay, we've now got all the evidence we need of these two head-to-head, same team, same bike. Thanks for the great service and those early heroic performances, Brad, but you head to Tech 3 now. We'll pop whoever you've got, Marquez, Bastianini, young kid we've put in there. We'll put you on the factory bike alongside Pedro for the rest of this season as his title fight backup instead. That's my KTM plan anyway.
I mean, I think I'm too emotional to think straight in terms of like this weekend from the non-Acosta KTM just left a really sour taste, which I guess it shouldn't have. I'm not the one paying their salaries or whatever, and I've seen all of them be good in some capacity, but just oof. I'm struggling to really see the forest for the trees here.
I'm starting to get to the point where I don't remember the last time I saw Jack Miller be good in a KTM.
Valencia last year.
Yeah, we threw it off the road.
No,
didn't
he crashed.
Well, he crashed, but like before he crashed,
yeah, no,
you saw
crashed.
him being
that
good.
Doesn't count.
I mean, you saw him being good
that
before he
crashed.
That's being fast. I would say
you don't get points. Yeah, you don't get points for half distance. This isn't endurance racing.
You get points for a sprint, but he hasn't won any of those either.
Exactly. The experiment hasn't really worked, has it? And I mean, if it is because of the bike, then bringing him in as a development rider hasn't really worked either.
One thing we mentioned very briefly earlier on was the number of riders complaining about arm pump at the end of this race. Quite a shocking number for something we still hear about occasionally, but not this much, not after a single race. And it felt like this was actually brought on specifically by what these bikes were doing to the riders at Mugello, Simon. Is that fair assessment?
Yeah. They've brought new aero. The new aero works well, but it seems over a race distance, the new aero is very heavy. The bike is very hard to turn through the long corners, and suddenly everyone has arm pump. It wasn't specifically a Yamaha problem. It was an Aprilia problem to the extent that Aleix Espargaro said that if there'd been a few more laps, he wouldn't have finished the race. And Raul Fernandez is off for surgery on Tuesday to try and address his problem again.
Second in 2 years.
But it's an issue. It's one that needs solving, because you cannot have a race series that relies on surgically altering your competitors to be able to compete in it. But it's also one that's not an easy one to fix, because it's the inherent nature of these big ground effect, high downforce fairings at circuits with big, long, fast flowing corners.
And also, I think it is. We have to acknowledge here that it is bike specifics related. In terms of like Marc Marquez was complaining about arm pump on the awful Honda last year. It doesn't not coming up this year because his bike isn't awful anymore. So I mean, the Aprilia isn't awful, but it's clearly very physical, very heavy. Although Maverick Vinales and Miguel Oliveira were okay, so it's not like a universal issue. But it clearly 2 out of 4 is pretty bad. For me, it's whoever watches baseball knows that they have a situation these days where the pitchers throw so hard that their elbows go wrong, and they have to have surgery called Tommy John surgery that takes them out for a season. And like all the really good pitchers go through it because they throw so hard that they do damage to their elbow. it's like we're in a similar-ish situation in MotoGP, except it's a different surgery, less invasive, and it doesn't punish those who go fast. It punishes those who signed the wrong contract, in a way.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because over the weekends there was a lot of chat about the speed of these bikes at Mugello now, the cornering speeds. I know we want safety to be at the forefront and stuff. A big part of me loves watching bikes around Mugello so much, just the spectacle of these machines around these corners, that I hate the thought of anything pegging them back and slowing them down. But between the speeds on the straight and now what they're doing on the corners with the aero adding to that as well, it is becoming a more unnerving place. And the fact it's becoming fairly punishing to riders on particular bikes physically as well is a little bit of a worry too, especially because it's not like the aero changes for 2027 are going to go anywhere near far enough in this form to actually do anything to...
And there's still so much time before that. There's going to be so much more downforce added.
Yeah, good point. Val, at the end of last week's podcast, something really strange happened. It was like we were sat around a pub table and you were being your usual affable self, just chatting away. And then it was like we just jammed a stick up you, like a burning, pointy, spike-covered stick that just made you furious. And that was mentioning that we were feeling a bit optimistic about Yamaha's form based on a little bit of, the odd lap time, talk about developments in the test. And then Yamaha on Friday morning looked really interesting at Mugello, and we had a bit of chat about how maybe Val had committed terrible sacrilege with his horrendous Yamaha anger, and they were going to be absolutely fine from Mugello onwards. And then what happened? Where Yamaha's weekend, Val?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I should take those moments of thinking that I will have to come on this podcast and just eat crow for 40 minutes as a sign that, hubris and overexuberance is bad, and you should always be more reserved in your emotions than I was.
I wouldn't let you go on for 40 minutes with it. If you need to
that's true.
Take a sort of humble apology, I'm not going to let you have 40 minutes with it. You can do it in 2.
It is quite a bit of hubris for me right now, that's thinking that the whole episode will be that.
Yeah,
so yeah,
you going sorry Yamaha in very long sentences, but no. Yamaha ended up rubbish this weekend in the end, so it's fine.
They tested Mugello privately a couple of weeks ago or whatever. I don't remember specifically, and they had the new aero that they felt pretty good at in Barcelona. And when you test at a track with a MotoGP bike and then show up to that track soon, you're quick right away. And because of the MotoGP weekend format, that pays off pretty early on. And we saw it with... they were quick immediately in FP1, and that's sort of, you expect that. That's okay. And you see it with, when test riders come off from a test and then they show up, you can see them really good in FP1. I mean, that was at least part of why Dani Pedrosa's wildcards have been so good. It's that. Then in second practice, Alex Rins somehow put the second fastest time, and I started to sweat a little bit, but I knew that I had one trick up my sleeve. I knew I had this special sort of saving grace, which is that Alex Rins might have the single lap pace, but Fabio Quartararo has the race pace, and he did not make Q2 and will not make it probably through Q1 tomorrow. That's exactly what happened. Fabio Quartararo got stranded in Q1, didn't really come that close to advancing. Then in the races, Rins predictably fell back. Quartararo... he had some really good race pace this weekend, I think, better than usual, but he got arm pump, as mentioned already, in the race. So in the end, all they have to show for their reasonably promising weekend is 1 point. And I wasn't rooting against them, because this is a good story team with a lot of hardworking people and 2 really good riders who deserve to be fighting right up there. But I do think this is, again, just a nicer version of what I said last weekend. This is not the time for Yamaha to be beating its chest just because it's beating Honda.
I'm slightly disappointed that I thought I was going to get a little bit of a brief gloating over you for a while, and I got that stolen from me, which was really disappointing. But it kind of felt like the story of Yamaha's season, where they go really fast, really quickly, up to a point, and then just can't improve anymore. And normally that happens in a session, but this weekend it happened in a day. So that at least they've expanded that process out a bit. It means they're getting a little bit closer, but it what can you say about it? It's getting there. It is getting there. There are signs of positivity here. Finally, there are little bits to be hopeful about and optimistic about, and it's not a surprise that they're celebrating these wins or these promising results now and then like wins. But it was a very good reminder of how much work is still to be done, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, the time frame doesn't fill me with a ton of confidence. The whole situation doesn't really fill me with a ton of confidence because it's not like these other teams are standing still. I mean, all the factories ahead seem to have taken really substantial steps forward. We've been talking this whole episode about how much better the GP24 is than the GP23. I mean, that's your target, and those guys have improved this much. And every time that happens, the clock ticks a little bit more. So when you do arrive close enough to them, well, the regulation cycle is over potentially. So you've not wasted time because it's elite sport. Somebody has to come 10th, somebody has to come 15th, and that's fine. And people work harder than maybe I've ever worked on anything to come 10th and 15th. And who am I to say anything about that? But in terms of it's the optimism that I don't share. I've not seen the progress. They were 20 seconds off this weekend. Their bike is making their arms swell up with blood. I don't know, man. I don't see it.
It's never an endorsement, really, is it? So in the end, the most interesting thing about Yamaha's weekend, rather than a glorious podium return, ended up being Fabio Quartararo's collision with Miguel Oliveira and subsequent stewards rant. We're talking stewarding, so let's go Simon first. What was your take on that collision and the steward's response to it, and Quartararo's response to that response?
I have no idea at all how Miguel Oliveira avoided a penalty. I just do not understand it. We've seen Fabio Quartararo be penalised for less. I mean, Quartararo did something similar to Aleix Espargaro, ran him wide but didn't cause him to crash, and got a penalty for it in Assen 2022.
Yes.
Yeah. So it is no surprise that he was frustrated by it. He was frustrated. He wasn't frustrated that Oliveira got a penalty, to be fair to him. He was deeply frustrated about the process by which Oliveira's penalty wasn't explained to him afterwards. He went to the steward's office. He said that it was like talking to a brick wall. He said that it was like speaking to people that had never raced motorbikes in their lives. He said that he left more confused than he arrived. And that's just pretty much a standard trip to the MotoGP steward's office these days. I mean, technically the MotoGP stewards work for the International Race Team Association, IRTA, and IRTA president Hervé Poncharal put out a statement after the Moto3 race that basically said the same thing. It is almost universal that they just cannot explain why they make decisions, and then whenever they make decisions that people don't understand, they it comes as no shock because there's this complete lack of clarity. Another weekend that just proved it. And then, at the same time, there is a complete and utter lack of respect for the stewards in every sense of the word, because you've got Pecco Bagnaia going out and calling them clowns for handing him a penalty that was absolutely deserved because he was cruising in the racing line.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I should preface this by saying I don't really get the Oliveira Quartararo thing. I saw it, I thought it was a penalty immediately. I've seen it multiple times since and have not changed my view. I think it should have been a long lap on Sunday. Oliveira's argument that because it was a valid overtaking attempt, it shouldn't be a penalty, doesn't do anything for me. I mean, it didn't come off. It caused two riders to crash. I mean, I know you weren't planning to hit him, Miguel. I know it. You're not. Why would any of us think that you were planning that? But the overtake didn't come off, and the two guys were. Honestly, even Oliveira himself sounded like he was a little bit surprised to get away with that one. But that's the one incident in the weekend, and honestly, the fact that Fabio Quartararo had to bring up an incident from 2 years back as the counter argument, I'm not sure that's the strongest case out there, but okay. I don't know why Aston 2022 still rubs him the wrong way, but okay, that's neither here nor there. The other stuff, I was really not impressed with some of the other stuff in terms of the attitude towards the stewards. I know there's as we've said before, there's a legitimacy crisis and a lack of respect, and there is some reason for it, but leaving aside Enea Bastianini's active protest from last weekend, I think Bastianini just personally maybe has been having a rough time too. He's probably going to lose his ride. Apparently his pet dog died, which is awful. And brief tangent, we discussed like matters of tenths, like a tenth, half a tenth, 2/10, and then something like that might happen in a person's life that we just don't hear about. How is that going to affect their performance? And that's for all of them, because all of them are super complicated people. And it's just, for me as a sports analyst of sorts, if you allow me to call myself that, that's just a really difficult thing to think about. Because you can't remember how much goes on in people's heads. I know how much goes on in my head, so yeah, all the strength to Enea. But Pecco Bagnaia repeatedly getting worked up about his grid penalty for impeding Alex Marquez on Friday, and calling it a clown penalty and calling it ridiculous, and, you know, almost carrying himself like he was going to use it as motivation or whatever, didn't sit particularly right with me. The appeal that they lodged didn't sit particularly right with me. I don't know what they were appealing, because an impeding penalty is that sort of thing that even if you got yourself off the line, if there's a reasonable explanation for how you hurt the person's lap by being on the line a few seconds prior, that's enough. And I've watched that incident a few times. I think Alex Marquez did have his lap ruined. Of course he reacted afterwards. It's Q0. That's if he doesn't get another lap, that's his weekend. He goes home. He might as well just park it up and go home. So I wasn't very impressed with Pecco Bagnaia being annoyed at Alex Marquez's reaction or annoyed at the stewards. That's one. I was really unimpressed with Hervé Poncharal, the Tech 3 boss, taking the stewards to task for the Moto3 penalty. So let's describe this for those who maybe don't watch Moto3. Danny Holgado, one of the championship contenders, goes into turn 1. He has a bit of a wobble lunging down the inside, and from one camera angle it looks like a little bit. From the helicam it looks like a serious wobble. He goes almost perpendicular to the racing line. He's still in control. He's going to make the corner. He has to check up a little bit because of a bike in front, because he's coming in so fast, and as a result of that, checking up and washing out wide, he hits another very strong rider, Jose Rueda, and then that takes Rueda down, and that takes another rider down on the outside of the corner. In the post-race Tech 3 press release, Hervé Poncharal said that he went to the stewards. There was no satisfactory explanation for the penalty. He had a lot of really strong words about it. He said that nobody's explained to him how this is a penalty, and that he invites everybody to watch that incident and go tell him how this is a penalty. I've watched that incident. It's a penalty. Maybe it's not a double long lap, it's a single lap, but we cannot do this in MotoGP and the lower classes. We cannot just object to every single penalty we or our rider gets. And this is, I feel like people are now using the lack of confidence in the stewards regime to just argue any old case, to try to stick anything to the wall. Impeding? No, it isn't. They don't know what they're talking about. Didn't cut the track and didn't lose a second? Yeah, I did. They can't count. My rider took down 2 people at turn 1. Well, did he really? No, he didn't. I don't like that at all. It has to be both ways. I think Aleix Espargaro said the exact same thing after the race today, or maybe yesterday or today, one of those 2 days. There has to be respect 2 ways. Even if you don't like that current regime now, you can try to get it changed. I knocked over a bunch of cans. You can try to get it changed, but you have to give them common courtesy. And I think arguing every decision isn't common courtesy.
Val, this is great. You've invented a new closing segment to every podcast of Let's Enrage Val right at the end. Yamaha last week. People crying wolf.
So angry he trashes his house.
Yes, absolutely. So from now on in podcasts, we work out during the week what's really starting to enrage Val a little bit. Get his wife to arrange some cans, bin bags, something noisy nearby, just so when Val loses the plot about Yamaha doing well or people crying wolf to the stewards, there's a good sound effect.
Look, I don't need no help to crap up my table with random stuff, so I tell you what.
on that note, Simon, you need to get to actually you've got to test first, then you must get to the Isle of Man. Val, we've got a bit of catching up to do. We're going to be launching something new on the race for MotoGP fans in the coming weeks, so keep an eye out for that. We have quite a few ideas for how to fill the podcast gap between now and racing resuming at Assen at the end of the month. Until then, have a lovely week. We'll be back in your ears next Monday or Tuesday.
The Athletic.